You have $10,000 sitting in front of you, and all you have to do is start the helicopter. The woman's voice carried across the private airfield, sharp with confidence and urgency. Name your price. Just get it running. Everyone else would take the offer. But the quiet man standing beside the hangar door never reached for the money. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply looked at the helicopter, placed his worn leather bag on the ground, and walked toward the aircraft like he had known it his entire life. The morning sun stretched across the Los Angeles private terminal, reflecting off polished metal and expensive vehicles lined along the runway. Executives moved quickly with phones in their hands, assistants whispered about schedules, and a team of professionals waited for the female CEO who had built an empire before most people her age had found their direction. Madeline Crawford was used to solutions arriving the moment she asked for them. Time was money. Delays were unacceptable. And today, every minute mattered. Her meeting in Los Angeles could determine the future of a billion-dollar aviation partnership. Yet the one machine that could get her there remained silent. Then she saw him. Caleb Whitmore looked nothing like the people who usually stood around her. His faded jacket showed years of use. His boots carried traces of early morning work. His hands looked like the hands of someone who fixed problems instead of discussing them. Beside him stood his 9-year-old daughter, holding a small backpack and watching her father with complete trust. "Sir, do you work here?" Madeline asked. Caleb glanced over. "No." "Then why are you walking toward my helicopter?" He looked at the aircraft again. "Because something is wrong with it." A few people nearby exchanged curious looks. The CEO almost smiled. Not because she found him amusing, but because she had heard confidence like this before. Usually, it came from people wearing expensive suits and carrying impressive titles. "You understand this is a private aircraft, right?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Yes." "And you understand I can pay someone qualified to handle it?" "Yes." His calm answer surprised her. "Then why aren't you interested in the money?" Caleb looked back at her, his expression peaceful. "Because I didn't come here for money." The air around the helicopter suddenly felt quieter. There was something different about him. Something she couldn't measure with a contract or a bank account. Caleb opened the access panel and began checking the aircraft carefully. He followed each step with patience and precision, not rushing, not performing for the crowd gathering nearby. He checked every detail like it mattered, because to him, it did. Madeline watched from a distance as the stranger moved with a familiarity she couldn't understand. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't pretending. He was remembering. And she had no idea that the quiet single dad standing beside her was not just a man looking for ordinary work. He was a former U.S. Army helicopter pilot whose greatest achievements had never been written on a business card. Before the helicopter ever left the ground, Madeline Crawford would discover that the most valuable person at the airfield was the one person who never asked to be noticed. If you enjoy thoughtful stories with real emotion, please subscribe and support the channel. We truly appreciate it. And for those watching, have you ever experienced something like this in your own life? Share your story in the comments. Now, let's get back to the story. Caleb Whitmore had learned a long time ago that silence could reveal more than words ever could. While the people around the private airfield watched with curiosity, he continued his careful inspection of the helicopter without looking for approval. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was not trying to prove a point. He was simply doing what he had always done when something important was placed in his hands. He paid attention. The morning wind moved gently across the runway as his daughter, Lily, stood near the hangar entrance holding her backpack. She had seen her father fix countless things over the years. Old trucks. Broken engines. Worn-out tools. But she had also noticed something else. Her father never rushed. He never bragged. He never needed people to know what he was capable of. "Daddy," Lily asked softly, are you going to be late for work? Caleb looked back at her and smiled. Maybe a little. Will we still get pancakes tonight? A quiet laugh escaped him. A promise is a promise. That small moment caught Madeline Crawford's attention. She had spent years surrounded by powerful people who talked about success, influence, and achievements. But she rarely saw someone who carried responsibility so naturally. Caleb was not trying to gain anything from the situation. He was simply a father keeping his word to his daughter. The CEO watched as he finished the final checks. There was a rhythm to his movements. A calm confidence that felt almost unfamiliar in a world where everyone seemed desperate to be noticed. One of the ground crew members stepped closer, studying Caleb carefully. You have done this before, he asked. Caleb closed the panel and answered quietly. A few times. The simple response created more questions than answers. Madeline crossed her arms, still trying to understand him. A few times, she repeated. Most people who know aircraft like this usually have certifications, companies, or at least a reason to be here. Caleb looked toward the helicopter. Sometimes people leave behind things they know. Those words stayed with her. Leave behind things they know. There was a story hidden inside that sentence, but Caleb did not offer it freely. Madeline was used to people explaining themselves. Executives wanted recognition. Employees wanted promotions. Strangers wanted opportunities. Caleb wanted nothing. As the helicopter preparation continued, the atmosphere around the runway slowly changed. The people who had ignored him moments earlier were now watching him with quiet respect. Not because of his clothes. Not because of his position. But because of the way he carried himself. There was discipline in his silence. There was experience behind his calm eyes. Madeline looked at the man standing beside the aircraft and felt a strange curiosity growing. She had spent her entire life learning how to evaluate people in seconds. She could read a business partner, predict a negotiation, and recognize ambition from across a room. But Caleb Whitmore was different. The more she observed him, the less she understood. And somewhere between the quiet sound of the helicopter systems coming alive and the morning sunlight over the runway, Madeline began to wonder if the stranger she had tried to pay was actually someone far more valuable than anyone she had ever met. Madeline Crawford had built her entire career on recognizing value before anyone else could see it. In crowded boardrooms, she could identify the strongest ideas. In negotiations, she could sense hesitation before a single word was spoken. But standing beside the helicopter that morning, she found herself unable to understand the quiet man who had refused her money. Everyone has a reason, she said, watching Caleb secure the final equipment checks. You must have one too. Caleb looked toward the aircraft for a moment before answering. I just wanted to help. It was such a simple response that it almost frustrated her. In her world, every action had a purpose. Every favor had a price. Every introduction led somewhere. Yet Caleb Whitmore seemed completely comfortable receiving nothing in return. The helicopter crew prepared for departure while the Los Angeles skyline waited in the distance. Madeline stepped closer, studying the details she had ignored before. The faded jacket. The worn boots. The calm expression of a man who seemed untouched by pressure. You do not seem like someone who works around aircraft casually, she said. Caleb gave a small smile. People change. That is not an answer. It is the truth. His quiet confidence made her pause. There was no arrogance behind his words. No attempt to create mystery. Just a man who had accepted that some chapters of life were meant to stay closed. Before boarding, Caleb turned toward Lily. Remember what I told you? She nodded. Be kind even when nobody notices. Caleb smiled. Exactly. Madeline heard the exchange and felt something shift inside her. She had spent years surrounded by people who wanted to be seen. People who measured success by attention, wealth, and influence. But this man was teaching his daughter something money could never purchase. Character. As they prepared for takeoff, Madeline sat across from Caleb inside the helicopter cabin. She expected silence to feel uncomfortable, but somehow it did not. There was peace in it. The kind of peace that came from someone who knew exactly who he was. You know, Madeline said, looking out the window, most people would have taken the $10,000. Caleb looked at her. Most people need different things. She studied him carefully. And what do you need? For a moment, the only sound was the steady hum of the aircraft preparing to rise. Caleb looked at a small photo tucked inside his wallet, a picture of Lily smiling beside him at a local park. Enough time with my daughter, he finally said. The answer surprised her more than any impressive title could have. As the helicopter lifted above the runway, Madeline watched the city grow smaller beneath them. She had expected to meet a man who wanted something from her. Instead, she found someone who had already decided what mattered most. But there was still one question she could not ignore. How did a quiet single father know the exact procedures of a private military-style aircraft? She glanced at him again, noticing the way his eyes checked the horizon, the way his attention moved naturally with every sound and movement around them. It was not the behavior of someone who had simply learned a skill. It was the behavior of someone who had lived it. And somewhere above the clouds, before they ever reached Los Angeles, Madeline Crawford began to realize that the stranger sitting beside her was carrying a story far greater than he had ever revealed. The higher the helicopter climbed above the clouds, the quieter the world below became. The busy roads, towering buildings, and endless movement of Los Angeles slowly disappeared beneath a blanket of morning light. Inside the cabin, Madeline Crawford sat with a question she could not let go of. Caleb Whitmore was not acting like someone who had learned aviation from a manual or a weekend course. He moved with the calm awareness of someone who understood every sound around him. Every small change. Every detail. You keep checking everything, Madeline said. Even though everything seems fine. Caleb looked forward. That is when people usually stop paying attention. His answer was simple, but it stayed with her. In her world, mistakes happened because people became too confident. Too comfortable. Too certain that nothing could go wrong. Yet Caleb carried a different kind of confidence. The kind built from preparation. The kind that did not need an audience. As the helicopter continued toward Los Angeles, Madeline watched him quietly. She noticed how he listened more than he spoke. How he never interrupted. How every decision seemed guided by responsibility rather than pride. It was completely different from the executives she spent every day negotiating with. Those people often wanted credit before results. Caleb seemed to believe the opposite. Results mattered. Recognition did not. You are very different from the people I usually meet, Madeline finally said. Caleb gave a small smile. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. She smiled slightly. I have not decided yet. For the first time that morning, there was a moment of ease between them. The CEO who controlled billion-dollar decisions and the single father who preferred a quiet life seemed to come from completely different worlds. But somewhere between those two worlds, a conversation began. Madeline asked about his daughter. Caleb spoke about Lily with a warmth that changed his entire expression. He described her love for drawing, her endless questions, and the way she believed every person had a story worth hearing. She sounds like a wonderful kid, Madeline said. She is, Caleb replied. She reminds me what matters. Those words were unexpected. Madeline had spent years chasing bigger goals, larger companies, and greater achievements. She had believed success meant reaching higher. But Caleb seemed to understand something she had forgotten. Sometimes success meant protecting the small moments that money could never replace. Then the helicopter entered a calmer stretch of air, and the conversation faded into silence again. But this silence felt different. It was not empty. It was comfortable. It was the quiet understanding between two people who were slowly seeing beyond appearances. Madeline looked at Caleb's hands resting calmly, the same hands that had carefully inspected every part of the aircraft without hesitation. She wondered what kind of life created a person like him. What experiences shaped that patience? What lessons taught him to remain humble despite clearly carrying extraordinary knowledge? She still did not know the truth. She did not know about the years he spent serving his country. She did not know about the missions, the discipline, or the responsibility he once carried. All she knew was that the quiet man beside her had something rare. Something no amount of money could purchase. And as the helicopter moved closer to Los Angeles, Madeline began to understand that the biggest secrets were not always hidden by people trying to impress the world. Sometimes, the greatest stories belong to those who quietly chose not to be noticed. The helicopter moved steadily through the morning sky, carrying two people who had started the journey as complete strangers. Yet somewhere between the clouds and the city below, something had changed. Madeline Crawford was no longer looking at Caleb Whitmore as a simple mechanic or a quiet father who happened to know aircraft. She was looking at him as a mystery. A man whose silence seemed to hide a lifetime of experiences. "You know," Madeline said, glancing at the instruments, "most people would have told me their entire life story by now." Caleb looked over with a calm expression. "Why?" "Because they would want me to know who they are." Caleb returned his attention forward. "I already know who I am." The answer was so peaceful that Madeline had no response. She had spent years watching people introduce themselves through titles. CEO. Founder. Investor. Leader. Everyone seemed to carry a list of achievements before they carried a conversation. But Caleb carried something different. He carried peace. As they approached the Los Angeles area, the city appeared beneath them like a field of glass and light. Madeline looked out the window, but her thoughts remained on the man beside her. She remembered the way he ignored the money. The way he protected his promise to his daughter. The way he treated every task, no matter how small, with complete attention. "Where did you learn to do all of this?" she finally asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. The question seemed simple, but the answer carried more weight than she realized. "A long time ago." Madeline noticed the slight pause before he spoke. It was not hesitation. It was something else. A memory carefully placed back where it belonged. "You do not talk about your past much, do you?" she asked. Caleb looked down briefly at his hands. "Some parts of life are not meant to be repeated every day." The words made her curious. Not because he was hiding something for attention. Quite the opposite. It felt like he had moved on from a chapter that once defined him. The helicopter continued its approach toward the private landing area in Los Angeles. A ground team waited below, preparing for arrival. Among them was a senior aviation technician named Robert Hayes, a man who had worked around aircraft for more than 20 years. The moment he saw Caleb step out, he froze. Not because Caleb looked important. He did not. Not because of his clothing. It was simple. It was because of the way Caleb carried himself. Robert watched the quiet movements, the careful awareness, the familiar habits of someone who had spent years around aircraft under serious responsibility. He walked closer slowly. "Excuse me," Robert said. Caleb turned. "Have we met before?" Caleb shook his head. Robert looked confused, studying him carefully. "I do not think so. But I have seen that kind of focus before." Madeline noticed the exchange. "What do you mean?" Robert looked between them, almost unsure whether he should speak. "I mean that people do not move like that unless they have spent years being responsible for more than just themselves." Caleb remained silent. He simply picked up Lily's backpack and prepared to leave. But as Madeline watched him walk away, one question became impossible to ignore. Who exactly was Caleb Whitmore before he became the quiet single father standing in front of her? And why did his forgotten past seem to be waiting for someone to finally recognize it? The moment Caleb Whitmore stepped away from the helicopter, the noise of the busy Los Angeles airfield seemed to fade around him. He was not looking for attention. He was not waiting for questions. He simply adjusted the strap of Lily's backpack and prepared to leave, just as he had done countless times before. But someone else was not ready to let the moment pass. Robert Hayes stood near the landing area, watching him carefully. "Wait," Robert called. Caleb stopped and turned around. "Yes." Robert hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I am sorry, but I have to ask. Where did you learn those procedures?" Caleb looked at him quietly. "I have worked around aircraft for a long time." Robert nodded slowly, but he was not satisfied. That was not the way a regular technician moves. That was the way someone moves when every detail matters. Madeline stood nearby, listening closely. She noticed something she had not seen before. For the first time, someone else was just as curious about Caleb as she was. Caleb looked uncomfortable with the attention. Not afraid. Not nervous. Just unwilling to make himself the center of the conversation. "It was a long time ago," he said. Robert studied him for another moment. "How long?" Caleb gave a small smile. "Long enough." Those two words carried more history than a full explanation. Madeline watched his expression carefully. She had negotiated with thousands of people. She knew when someone was avoiding a question because they had something to hide. But Caleb was different. He was not hiding from shame. He was protecting a memory. As Lily walked closer and reached for her father's hand, the entire scene changed. The mysterious aircraft expert was suddenly just a father again. A man making sure his daughter was ready for the next part of their day. "Daddy, are we still getting pancakes?" Lily asked. Caleb smiled. "I told you we would." Robert watched the interaction and lowered his voice. "He seems like a good man." Madeline looked at Caleb. "He is." She surprised herself by saying it so quickly. Just hours earlier, she had offered him money because she assumed he was someone who could be hired. Now she realized she had completely misunderstood him. Caleb was not valuable because of what he could do. He was valuable because of who he was. Before leaving, Robert walked toward a small office near the runway. Something about Caleb continued to bother him. Not in a negative way. It felt like a forgotten memory trying to return. He opened an old aviation database used by the company for maintenance history and professional references. He searched carefully, not expecting anything. Then he saw a familiar pattern. A name connected to years of aviation excellence. A name associated with discipline, skill, and service. Robert stared at the screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. He looked back through the window toward Caleb, who was standing outside with Lily, laughing quietly as his daughter showed him a drawing she had made. The world saw a single father with a simple life. But the records told a different story. Robert whispered to himself, "No way." And for the first time that day, someone finally understood that Caleb Whitmore was not a man who had forgotten his past. He was a man who had chosen to live quietly after it was over. Robert Hayes stared at the computer screen for several seconds, unable to move his eyes away from the information in front of him. The name belonged to a person he had only heard about through aviation stories and old records. A pilot known not for seeking attention, but for remaining calm when others needed someone they could trust. A professional whose reputation came from discipline, preparation, and responsibility. Caleb Whitmore. The quiet man standing outside the window was the same person. Robert leaned back slowly, realizing the truth had been standing in front of everyone all morning. "Why would someone like him be working here?" he whispered. It was a question without an easy answer. Outside, Caleb helped Lily adjust the straps on her backpack while she talked excitedly about her next school project. To anyone watching, he looked like any other father trying to make his daughter smile before starting another ordinary day. But Robert now understood that ordinary was the last word that described him. Madeline noticed Robert returning from the office with a different expression. "You found something," she said. Robert looked at her, then toward Caleb. "I found out that we had no idea who we were standing beside." Those words caught her attention. "What does that mean?" Robert took a breath. "Caleb Whitmore is not just someone who knows helicopters. He has a history." Madeline looked toward Caleb. "What kind of history?" Robert lowered his voice. "The kind most people would be proud to talk about. But he does not seem interested in telling anyone." That answer stayed with her. She had expected a story about ambition. A person who wanted recognition. A person who wanted to use his past to create opportunities. Instead, she discovered the opposite. Caleb had every reason to tell the world what he had accomplished, yet he chose silence. Later that afternoon, Madeline found Caleb near the edge of the airfield. He was waiting with Lily while they prepared to leave. The busy sounds of the airport moved around them, but their small moment felt separate from everything else. "Caleb," she said gently. He turned. "Yes." She paused, searching for the right words. "Why did you never tell me?" Caleb looked confused. "Tell you what?" "About your experience. About your past." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked toward Lily, who was drawing in her notebook nearby. "Because I am not my past." Madeline listened carefully. "But your past is incredible." Caleb smiled slightly. "Maybe. But my daughter does not need a hero. She needs a father." The sentence was quiet, but it carried more meaning than anything she had heard that day. Madeline had spent years surrounded by people chasing bigger names and larger achievements. Yet this man had chosen something far more difficult. He chose humility. He chose presence. He chose a life where his daughter knew him not because of what he had done, but because of how he treated her every day. For the first time, Madeline Crawford saw beyond the mystery. She saw the man. And she realized the greatest thing about Caleb Whitmore was not the story everyone else could discover. It was the reason he never felt the need to tell it. The days after the helicopter flight changed the way Madeline Crawford saw the world around her. She had spent years believing that every person could be understood by a title, a position, or a number attached to their name. But Caleb Whitmore had challenged everything she thought she knew. He had no interest in impressing her. He had no desire to benefit from her wealth. He simply helped because helping was who he was. A few days later, Madeline found herself visiting the small airport where Caleb worked. The place was far from the polished offices and luxury buildings she was used to. The walls showed years of use. The equipment was practical. The people were ordinary. Yet there was something peaceful about it. "You really choose this life?" she asked when she found Caleb checking a small aircraft nearby. Caleb looked up and smiled. "What do you mean?" "You could be anywhere. You have skills that could take you anywhere." Caleb looked around the quiet airfield. "I am exactly where I want to be." His answer surprised her. Madeline had always thought people settled because they had no other options. She was beginning to understand that sometimes people chose simplicity because they had already discovered what truly mattered. Nearby, Lily sat at a picnic table drawing pictures in her notebook. She waved when she saw her father looking at her. Caleb waved back immediately. That small gesture told Madeline more than any biography ever could. His greatest achievement was not hidden in a record or a history file. It was in the relationship he had built with his daughter. "You are a different kind of person, Caleb," Madeline said quietly. He smiled. "I do not know about that." "You really do not see it, do you?" she asked. "See what?" "The respect people have for you." Caleb looked away for a moment. Respect is not something you collect. It is something you earn every day. Those words stayed with her. Madeline had built a company by understanding markets, predicting trends, and making difficult decisions. But Caleb had built something she could not measure on a spreadsheet. Trust. Loyalty. A sense of peace. Later that afternoon, Madeline watched Caleb help another worker solve a small problem at the airfield. He did not act like someone with a remarkable past. He acted like someone who believed every person deserved patience and kindness. There was no pride in his actions. No need for applause. Just quiet responsibility. She finally understood why he never mentioned his years as a military pilot. He was not trying to hide from who he was. He had simply learned that a person's value did not come from what they once achieved. It came from what they chose to do every day. Before leaving, Madeline walked over to Caleb. "I owe you an apology," she said. Caleb looked surprised. "For what?" "For assuming money was the first thing you needed." He gave a gentle smile. "Most people assume that." "And you are not bothered by it?" she asked. Caleb looked toward the sunset over the runway. People can only see what they know how to see. Madeline looked at him differently now. She no longer saw a quiet stranger. She saw a man who had carried responsibility, sacrificed recognition, and still remained kind. And for the first time in years, the powerful CEO who had everything began to realize that the rarest kind of strength was not found in influence or wealth. It was found in a person who remained humble after having every reason not to. Weeks passed, but the memory of that morning at the airfield remained with Madeline Crawford. The helicopter, the quiet confidence, the simple kindness of a man who wanted nothing in return. She had met countless people throughout her career who measured their lives by what they could gain. Caleb Whitmore reminded her that some people measured their lives by what they could give. One evening, Madeline returned to the small airport as the sun began to disappear behind the horizon. The golden light covered the runway, turning the quiet airfield into a place that felt far away from the pressure of boardrooms and endless decisions. Caleb was there with Lily, helping her finish a school project. "You are still here after all these years," Madeline said. Caleb looked up and smiled. "Some places feel like home." She looked around. The simple buildings. The familiar faces. The peaceful atmosphere. It was nothing like the world she came from, yet somehow it felt more genuine. "I used to think success meant reaching the highest place possible," Madeline admitted. "The biggest company. The largest opportunities. The most influence." Caleb listened without interrupting. "And now?" he asked. She looked toward Lily, who was laughing while showing her father a drawing. "Now I think maybe success is knowing what you would never trade away." Caleb smiled softly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It carried understanding. It carried respect. Over time, Madeline began spending more moments with Caleb and Lily. She learned that Caleb remembered every small detail about his daughter's life. Her favorite books. Her dreams. The little things that made her happy. She also learned that behind his quiet personality was a man who had experienced extraordinary moments but never allowed those moments to define him. One afternoon, Madeline asked him about his years as a pilot. Caleb looked toward the sky. "Those years taught me a lot." "About flying?" she asked. He shook his head. "About responsibility. About people. About coming home and appreciating what matters." Madeline understood then. His past was not a story he wanted to use. It was a lesson he carried. Months earlier, she had offered him money because she thought his value came from what he could do for her. Now she knew his true value came from something deeper. His character. His patience. His quiet strength. The same qualities that made him a great pilot were the qualities that made him a great father. One evening, as they stood near the runway watching the last light disappear, Madeline finally said what she had been feeling. "You know, when I first met you, I thought I was giving you an opportunity." Caleb smiled. "And now?" She looked at him. "Now I realize you gave me one." The wind moved gently across the empty runway. Somewhere in the distance, a small aircraft passed through the evening sky. Caleb looked upward, and for a moment, Madeline saw the person he had once been. The pilot. The protector. The man who carried responsibility quietly. But she also saw the person he had chosen to become. A father. A friend. A man who proved that greatness did not always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrived quietly, wearing an old jacket, holding a child's hand, and reminding the world that true heroes never need to announce who they are. Thank you for being here until the very end. Your support truly means a lot to this channel. Before you leave, tell us, are you watching as a husband, wife, mom, dad, or just someone who enjoys stories like this? Share your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more stories every day.